Someone ever given you a rough bit of feedback? Sometimes people tell us something that we don't want to hear, but we need to hear. Other times though, we take on criticism that isn't fair or accurate. One of the keys to improving as a speaker is feedback. But you've got to be able to tell what feedback is useful and what is harmful. In this video, you're going to learn how to make that distinction. As many of you know by now, I'm a member of Toastmasters International, largest public speaking organisation in the world. I'm sure that many of you watching are also Toastmasters. In Toastmasters, we have different speech competitions where you enter a speech, compete against other people, and you get judged on it. There's lots of different rounds of these speeches. They can go to the national and even the international level. What has been a silver lining of the last couple of years is that, like everything else, Toastmasters has moved online. What I've been able to do in recent contests, therefore, is get a much wider source of feedback on my speaking. I've been able to take my speeches and go to different clubs in different countries around the world, and that has revolutionized some of these competition speeches. Before the contest, I'll have my first draft and my outline of the speech that I want to do. And by the time that I've gone through multiple trials and getting feedback, tweaking and improving, I will go through anywhere between 3 and 5 different versions of the speech. And by the time I'm at version 3 or version 5, it's almost unrecognizable from that very first version. There's maybe just a few gems that have managed to stay in the whole way. And the message is the same, the concepts are the same, the ideas are the same. But the way that I'm telling it, the type of language that I'm using, the structure that I have, all of that gets transformed through the quality of the feedback that's coming this way. And that's what great feedback does. It takes what you have and it makes it the best it can possibly be. It's not changing it into something that isn't you and you can't do, because it's your story, it's your message, it's your ideas. But it's helping you to tap into some of those skills, some of those abilities that you're maybe not quite aware of when you're just trying to do it by yourself. That's the power of feedback. It should transform that first draft of what you're speaking about into something that's almost unrecognizable. What we're going to cover in this video is some of the key principles for learning how you can take that feedback and use it effectively to tap into that transformational potential that it has. The first principle to using feedback effectively: ignore the extremes. You get no useful feedback from the polar edges. There is no point listening to your harshest opponents because they're just going to tear down everything you say. But also be careful about listening to your strongest supporters, because they aren't objective either. They are just going to tell you how wonderful and amazing you are, and it's so good that you are sharing this message, that you're speaking on this topic, but they're not telling you, well, how would you convince someone who isn't already convinced? So you've got to make sure that you're not preaching to the choir, and you're also not preaching to the devil either. You need to work out, what are the people in the middle going to say? You're never trying to win over the extremes with any argument. The people in your camp, they're already there. The people who you're against will never be there. Who are the people in the middle, and how do you get them to listen to you? And you'll never find out how to do that if you listen to the extremes. So ignore your harshest critics, but also, I've got to say, ignore your strongest supporters. You've got to find that objective feedback that's in the middle. The second principle: make sure you're always putting your own spin on any suggestions that you get. When you get some feedback and you get a really great idea, someone suggests, why don't you use this question here to engage the audience? Or why don't you have the character in your story say something like this? A tendency when we feel that we have a lower level of expertise than someone who's giving us feedback is we just copy their suggestions verbatim. The issue with that is then it's no longer you speaking. You're just being a mouthpiece for some of the suggestions and feedback that you've got. So absolutely, be able to take on those great suggestions. Oh yeah, if I put a question in here, that will really engage the audience at this critical time. Or if I have the character say this instead, it's going to add a lot more drama and tension to the story. Take the principle of the suggestions, but you've got to do it in your own way. So don't become a mouthpiece and say exactly what you've been told to say in feedback. Think, okay, I'll take that on, but how would I do my version of that? What would be my question to engage the audience? What would be my idea for the character's different dialogue? Make sure you always put your own spin on the suggestions, because otherwise then your speech just becomes this weird cyborg of different people's ideas, and it's not your speech anymore. You've always got to make sure that you hold on to your speech. And that ties into our final suggestion I'll be sharing with you in just a moment. Our Facebook group, Rise and Inspire Speakers, provides you with a safe, supportive community to develop the skills to get your message out into the world. We host a virtual summit, Inspire Week, within the group every month, where you can sign up for a 30-minute slot to speak live in the group. This is a free opportunity you can sign up for month after month to practice your skills, try new things, and refine aspects of your story and message. There is a ton of educational content that gets pumped into this group. You can access ongoing educational resources that help you gain more confidence on camera, create more compelling speech content, and develop a deeper connection with your ideal audiences. Speaking of connection, the members of our community are fantastic. They are like-minded people who, just like you, want to make a difference in the world and will cheer you on and encourage you every step of the way. If you want to master your virtual speaking skills, then this is the place to be. Principle number 3, you've got to stick to your values. When you have a clear idea of what you want your speech to be, what you want your message to be about, there will be people who tell you you shouldn't say it that way, or you should tone it down a little. Sometimes that feedback should be taken on board. You're going at something a little bit strong, you're going at it from the wrong angle, it's not going to connect with people, it's not going to win people over. Absolutely, sometimes you should listen to that feedback and realize, I'm not quite expressing this in a way that comes across right. But there's also times where you recognize you just need to stick by your guns. And people will be telling you, no, you can't have that, or no, you need to change that, or no, you need to put this in. There's an example that came across recently to me of this. I was watching the biopic film Milk about Harvey Milk. For those of you who don't know, Harvey Milk was the first openly gay politician in the United States of America. There was this piece of legislation coming out that was going to infringe on the rights of gay teachers. That if someone was gay, they weren't allowed to teach in a school. And Harvey Milk was composing this speech to try and win over people to vote against this amendment or bill. I can't quite remember the right terminology. Bill, I think, to vote against this proposition. Vote against this proposition. And he's talking about how this is an attack on the gay community. That's a violation of the gay community. And all of his advisors were saying, Harvey, don't make this about gay people. Make this a human rights abuse. Go for the human rights angle, saying that this is impinging on someone's human right. It's in the Constitution to be private, to not have their private lives affect their private. And they'll tell him to go for that angle because there was more commonality in it. But Harvey was saying, no, this isn't an attack on people's human rights. This isn't an attack on everyone else's private lives as a teacher. This is only about gay teachers' private lives. This is an attack on gay people, and I'm going to talk about it being an attack on gay people. So he didn't go for the human rights angle. All his advisors are saying, find that common ground, you'll get people on side if you make it about human rights. If you make it about gay people, this proposition, it's going to be voted for overwhelmingly. Harvey stuck to his guns. the proposition was voted against 2-1. 2-1, a landslide result, not to infringe on the privacy of gay teachers, to allow teachers to work in schools regardless of what their sexual orientation was. Harvey was able to achieve that because he stuck to his guns. He knew what his values were. He knew what his message was. He wanted to end discrimination against gay people, and he had to state that. He had to stand for that. And being wishy-washy and trying to please everyone was not going to get the result that he wanted. And sometimes you'll need to do that in your speeches too. Sometimes you need to stick to your guns. Sometimes you will have to be bold in what your message is. Be bold in what your purpose is. Be bold in who you are and what you stand for. Feedback is fantastic. Feedback can help you hone and refine the power of that message, but don't ever let it diminish that message. There will be times where you have to stick to your guns to make sure that that message isn't diminished by well-meaning, but ultimately unhelpful feedback. So I hope that these suggestions give you some idea of how you take on feedback. Too often, people either completely ignore feedback and think they know everything, which is the wrong approach, or they get swayed too much by feedback and say, oh, well, this person told me to do this and that person told me to do that. And it dilutes the essence of who they are as they're speaking. Don't let either happen to you. Don't let your ego get in the way, but don't allow yourself to be compromised either. Sometimes, though, we take on criticism that isn't really fair or accurate. Hiya. You want to come on Daddy's video? Come on Daddy's video. Come on. Oh. We're talking about feedback. You gotta give some feedback to the audience. What feedback do you have on Daddy's video? We're not very impressed. Not very impressed, guys. Toughest critic in the world is a kitty cat. Alright, you go off and play.